Well, good afternoon, somewhat good evening, everybody. Rod back with you again here on Sunday. A little snowy outside. Gonna take a little cruise over to my buddy's place and visit for a bit, see what's going on, maybe grab a coffee or something. But before I go, and I usually load my videos at his place because he's got fast internet. So I was asked about when you buy an old side-by-side shotgun of various qualities. And this guy that I was talking to is a Canadian viewer. He was pertaining to the selection at Inner Surplus. And he said, Rod, I was there looking. I'm seeing all these shotguns. There's German, there's French, there's English, there's you name it. He said, I'm not opposed to 2.5-inch shotguns. He said, I'm not opposed to 2 3/4. But he said, I want to know what's safe to shoot in them guns. And of course, I told him that, you can't really pick one level of safety for like a blanketing all the guns. But the more modern stuff, like you'll see on the site, like the German-made stuff, the Simpsons, the J.P. Sowers, the Merkels, the Sewells, the Buags, and stuff like that, those German guns are pretty much made like the time when 2 3/4 chambers were in use. Some of them are 2.5-inch. They're the pre-war models. I find the ones that are post-war tend to be 2 3/4, and if they're marked nitro 2 3/4, they're probably proof for standard load modern shells, like 1.25 loads, 1.125 field loads, shoot just fine in them. I had a J.P. Sauer here, which I recently sold. It was 2 3/4. It was built in 1957. Perfectly capable gun. Could fire modern lead shot shells or bismuth shot shells with ease, slugs, buckshot, whatever. Then he asked about some of the English guns and some of the older, like off-brand guns that he had on there, like one-offs and whatnot. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Okay, here's an English gun. This is my Army and Navy. Everybody knows this gun. This is my baby. This is my pride and joy. And like I said, this is, it's a fairly valuable gun. And it's a Damascus gun. And there's a video on it. If you want to go see some more in-depth review and pictures on it, by all means, go have a look at it. I don't have to really go through it again, but I will tell you, this is a side lock, non-ejector, grade 3, Army and Navy, Damascus 12 gauge, 2 3/4 chambers. They were not opened up. This gun was built with 2 3/4 chambers. It's an upland bird gun, cylinder, and just not quite modified. So it's an upland bird gun, very dainty, very light. It only weighs about probably 6.5 pounds. Very slender in the wrist. When you talk low pressure, this is the ideal gun to use that kind of ammunition in. So what do I mean by low pressure? So this is Damascus. It is black powder proofed. There are smokeless loadings available. Now, people have the construed, like the misconception that, you can't use the smokeless in it, or you shouldn't use the smokeless in it, and what should you use? So if you're looking into a gun like this, Damascus, good condition, remember, our checkpoints, look for rust outside, check your rib joints, look for delamination, deep pitting, rust, dents, and we're going to open her up. She's nice and tight, this one. And nice clean bores. That's another thing you want to look for. Nice, clean, shiny bores, as you can see. So you want to make sure there's no wiggle and tight on face. Once you've met all those criteria, then you can worry about, the mechanicals, you get it checked out, the hammer springs are tight, the firing pins are in good shape, the locking is good. So now we are going to either craft ammo or find ammo to shoot in these. Now, is there black powder ammo currently made by any manufacturers? The answer is yes. Kent game board does have a traditional black powder fiber wad loading, a 1 ounce field load, and I believe it's loaded with a fairly light charge. I think it's around 70 grains of 2F black powder and fiber wads and 1 ounce of shot. So in a light gun like this, recoil will be manageable. You're not going to hurt that slender stock. You're not going to crack. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of meat there. That's only about an inch and a half thick here. So you don't want to be beating the big magnums for this thing and splitting it from, well, I use the saying we do, from arse to appetite. Or you don't want to split it here in the tank because there's not a lot of wood here on the side lock. This is all hogged out in here to house the locks. So this area, the web, is very thin. And normally you see them crack and split really poorly under here and get repaired. But this one here, this is solid as the day is long. So the pressure that load would probably make would be in the 4,500 to 5,500 psi. So if you take your black powder or Pyrex and you use a measure as such, this is my black powder measure I use for my percussion shotgun and my black powder rifle. It starts at 60 grains. This is a Thompson Center one. I've had it a long time. So starts at 50 grains. So 50, 60, 70, and it goes up to 120. So 70 grains. You're going to fill this to the top. You're going to dump this in your shell. You're going to put your fiber wad, your card wad, your fiber wad, your lead shot, and you are going to use, if you're lucky, an old roll crimper as such, or if you have the Ballistic Products one that goes into a drill or a drill press and you bring it down, you can roll crimp your shells, and they generally turn out like that. You know, there's your roll crimp shell. Now, what I did with this is a black powder pellet slug that I made from the Lyman pellet, 2.5 inch, and I can use this for a deer load in my Damascus gun. Hopefully to get a shooting video. I got a few of these done up. I'm going to try them and see what kind of accuracy I can get for one of my Damascus guns. I've got this one, and I've got my Henry Piper. But in getting back on track with the ammo here, you generally want to make sure that you look at the time period the guns were made, and you tend to want to match that time period of ammo. You go back and look and see what was available. Like, you know, okay, let's say like in the 1930s and 40s, you know, you had, let me see if I can find something here that I can just grab and kind of show right quick. You know, let's say, okay, our Canadian guys are going to know these things. The old Imperial shot shells, the old cardboard shells. Now, I did reload this one with 000 buck. But I'm just saying, this is the style of shells that you seen years ago. They were loaded with smokeless and black powder back in the days. And this is just the type of loadings, the fiber wad loadings, that you would have seen prevalent versus wads with plastic shot cups. Now, when loading black powder, you tend to want to stick with fiber wads and card wads like this. So here's an example of a cushion wad, and this is a wax cushion wad, so it's fairly stiff, but the wax helps seal the smoothness of the bore to keep gas from blowing by. You also want to use a stiff nitro card over your powder charge. And, you know, you build yourself a wad column, and I don't have any more of them out here, but generally you'd have your stiff card, then you have your cushion wad, you'd have another stiff card, then your shot, then an overshot card, and then you'd roll crimp your shell, and you end up with something, if you use the Federal paper gold shells they have out now, you end up with something like this, and 2.5 inch, and they work great. You get a few loads out of them. They're nice quality. They roll, give a really nice rolled edge there, and you can kind of mimic the loads of years ago. Now, we move forward into the period. Okay, that gun there would probably be my Army Navy's like late 1880s, early 1890s. Black powder was prevalent, and so on and so forth. So then we move turn of the century. So we move to the 1900s, and we have here a side-by-side 12 gauge. At one point was chambered for 2.5-inch fluid steel barrels, not Damascus, nitro-proofed back then for 1 1/8 ounce of shot and 3 tons per square inch of pressure. So that translates into 9,000 psi in today's standards. Now, your average skeet load of today is probably hanging around that range, 9,000 to 10,000 psi. And that's only our trap loads that you go to Walmart or Canadian Tire and you look for these things. These, example, Winchester Universals or Federal Top Gun, that's another one. And those loads, though people might think, oh, they're only skeet shells and they don't kick much, it's not the part of the kick. It's the pressure that they create and the types of powders that they're using nowadays versus what was available then. So in this era, 1908, you had smokeless powder, but you were still dealing with fiber wads and no plastic wads then. So you were dealing with paper shells, rolled crimps, short chambers, 2.5-inch, and the gun was proof for, let's say, like it says here, the old proofing was 3,000 psi. Now, this gun was reproofed in the 1970s. It was resleeved and rechambered to 3-inch. So this kind of now is a modern gun of sense. It's still from the days of old, but it's been modernized and taken into context of more modern ammunition, higher pressures, because it's got 3-inch chambers now. So I don't plan on shooting 3-inch in it, but it's still no play, tight as a drum, and good condition. And still, if you're going to buy a gun in this kind of a configuration, you're still going to want to make sure that you conform to the proofs that's underneath that barrel. Keep your 2.5-inch shells, keep your pressures low. Just remember, you don't need a ton of pressure to make a gun pattern well or a gun to kill any further. There are limitations, and that's just the way it is. You know, a bird shot, 1 1/8 ounce, you know, effectively 40 yards, 35 yards. You're not going to go kill 70 and 80 yards with it. It's just not going to happen. There's no sense trying to hot rod it and make it do what it's not supposed to. You only end up hurting the gun, and you could hurt yourself. I mean, there could be gun failure, but what happens is they get loose in the lock, and you start to rattle them and trip to the gunsmith if you're not able, and you're looking at a barrel refacing job, maybe a new knuckle pin, and it's going to cost you some dineros. It's going to cost you some money. But if you keep the pressures down and you keep the loads appropriate, this is going to last another 100 years with no problem at all. So this is, you know, if you're on Intersurplus's site and you're into his English stuff and you're looking around and you see something like this, you know, fluid barrels, I mean, don't just assume you can go put magnum loads to it. Do your homework, guys, and your gun will last you a long time. So now we're moved in from, so we transitioned from an English side-lock Damascus 12 that shoots black powder ammo, 2 3/4 chambers, you know, keep loads appropriate, keep the pressures down, black powder only. We went through 1908-ish, and now this is about as far as I can bring us ahead, because this is the most modern double that I have. And this is my Husqvarna Model 610 that was built in 1949 in Sweden. And everybody knows the Swedes make excellent quality stuff. Their steels are really good. Their workmanship, I mean, listen to this thing. It's even tighter than the others. This thing is like virtually brand firing new, and the barrels are like new as the gun. So this gun is chambered 2 3/4 inch, modern loads, smokeless powder. You can shoot black powder in it if you want to be nostalgic, no problem. Just make sure you clean out your barrels and whatnot and get all that powder residue out there like you treat any other black powder firearm, like a muzzle loading shotgun or a rifle. Hot soapy water, rinse the bores out with a swab, dry them out, oil them, you're golden. As long as you do that, no fouling will hurt your gun. And clean your breech faces and anything where black powder residue may go. Like you open them up here, you might get some fouling on the faces of the receiver. Clean that all off, because eventually that can lead to pitting and damage your firearm's appearance. So in this case here, Winchester Universals are just fine. Regular like rifled slugs are fine. Buckshot is fine. This would be the do-it-all 12 gauge with the exception of steel shot. Generally what it is with steel shot, you have to have more open chokes, and you want to have a gun that's probably proofed to a higher pressure rating, because the new steel rounds are usually running upwards of like 12,000 psi. I've seen some loads in the book. The RSI book I had here, some of the loads I was using in my semi-automatic, they were upwards of 12,500 to 13,000 psi. They're getting up there. So shooting loads, even though the chokes were open in a gun like this, you're going to be beating the old girl to pieces. They're not really designed for that high pressure. Even though it's chambered for it, it'll shoot it. Eventually, over time, the gun's going to get loose on you. You're going to have the old rattle trap type syndrome going on. And again, a trip to the gunsmith, maybe a new knuckle pin, some work on the lumps to get her tightened back up, and really just overtaxing the gun. You're really putting it through its paces that it shouldn't. So I guess we get back to, when you're buying these guns, what do you have in mind? Are you going to be skeet shooting, recreational, small game birds like quail, partridge, pheasant, rabbits? Perhaps you might decide to take it for a deer with a ball shot or a slug or whatnot. You still have to keep in mind that the pressures have to be observed, and you have to respect the firearm for what it was designed to shoot. And, you know, guns like, I'll use this example, the Belgian guns used to get a really bad rap for being junk, rattle traps, clunkers. That little rattly here, just a little play in a hammer, that's nothing but no rattling. And the barrels are in good shape of this. This one's my old modified Diana grade Henry Piper. It's still a good old tight gun. But again, you have to be mindful of the condition of the bores, the ribs, the stock, the mechanicals, the overall wellness of the gun. Once you deem it's good, shoot appropriate ammo through it for what it was designed for, and respect the gun for what it is. Don't try and make it be something that it's not. This is not a Magnum capable gun. This is not a modern gun. This is a classic external hammer, Damascus barreled, 12 gauge. This one has 2 3/4 chambers, but still black powder. And if you're not in tune with loading black powder, or it's the methodology through it, watch some YouTube videos. You need some certain materials, of course, your regular black powder or Pyrex, that's acceptable. You can use the other substitutes as well, like 777, loose powder. I've seen guys use the select grade Pyrex, myself included, the regular RS. Black powder, like 1F, 2F, and 3F are fine. Smaller bores, you want to use a finer granulation of powder, like FFF, and larger bores, like 12 and 10 gauge. 2F or even 1F, The larger granulations powder do decrease pressures in the larger bores, so if you load an 80 grain charge of 2F and an 80 grain charge of 1F, the 1F charge will create less pressure, not necessarily less velocity, but less pressure than the 2F load, and vice versa with the 3F load. 80 grains of 3F will have more pressure than 80 grains of 2F, and that's just how it works. So make sure you're using the right granulation of powder. Find a wad column that works for you and your shells. Keep the load, the weights appropriate, 1 ounce to 1 ounce and 1/8. That's plenty for those old guns. And you're going to keep your pressures with black powder between the 4,500 psi mark to about the 6,000 psi. And those guns will handle it with ease, with no problem. They're proof for that. They're actually proof for more than that. When they were made, they were actually, they went through 2 proofs. They went through a provisional proof, like an observed proof, and then they went to their final proof. Their final proof was a double charge. Double charge of shot, double charge of powder, and if they passed that, they were considered to put in service for their proof pressures. So they would stamp the barrels accordingly. And that's another thing. When you buy the English guns, the German guns, the European guns in general, Belgian guns, you'll observe proof marks. It'll tell you your chamber lengths. It'll tell you the weight shot that it was proof for in some ways. The bore diameters, the choke constrictions, and whatnot. And I can't be more clear. Steel shot is not safe in a tight choke in any gun, whether it's new or old. Steel shot is made to perform well in open chokes. Guns proof for higher pressures. So, as far as the old guns go, I'm not aware of any factory loaded low pressure steel shot that's out there. So there are bismuth loads. Now bismuth's like lead. Bismuth is soft. It constricts. It goes through tight constrictions. It's safe to shoot in the old guns, in the Damascus barrel and twist barrels. So if you find bismuth loads in a manual and you want to load black powder with bismuth, it's going to cost you a fortune, but can be done, and you can use the gun for waterfowling, which I've read articles and forums where guys do that, and they enjoy their hunting quite well. A lot of guys take their old Parkers out, their English guns, and go out wildfowling or bird hunting, and use non-toxic shot, and they're still complying to the rules, and at the same time, they're respecting the old gun. They're keeping it safe, keeping the pressures down, and so on and so forth. So, in closing, if you're on that site and you see a gun, I know you might not be able to observe the proof marks in any of their pictures, but I'm sure if you asked for one of the folks there to remove the barrels and send you a picture of underneath the barrel flats and look at the proof markings and see what they are, it might help a little more identify to what the gun's capabilities are. But generally in the description, you're going to see, like when I bought this one, it said 2 3/4 inch chambers, modified full chokes. That's pretty standard. That's pretty common. When I bought the GE Gold, it didn't say it was 3-inch chambers because they did not observe that this thing was re-sleeved to 3-inch. So it was still marked as 2.5 inch. One barrel is improved cylinder and the other one is light modified. So, keep in mind choke constrictions, chamber lengths, barrel material, pressure limits of the gun, and, if you keep everything within respectful limits, an old gun like this will suit you just fine. If you so wish to shoot modern steel loads and waterfowling and whatnot, and you still want to go shoot low pressure loads and go have fun the old ways, you can do that with a modern double. I hate to say it, like that Churchill 512 that I had, technically modern Magnum steel double barrel capable shooting gun. You could go that route and you could get away with shooting everything through it with no worries. But if you want to be nostalgic and you want to have a gem of a gun like this, it's like an Army and Navy or something like this. Mind you, you're not going to get this cheap. Inner Surplus has a couple very similar to this on their website. They start at $1,700 Canadian and go right up to $3,600 Canadian, depending on which one you want. I would place this one in about the $2,500 range. The Damascus ones don't quite fetch as much as the fluid barrel ones, but nonetheless, this gun is still worth money, and it's not a cheap venture to get into, but you can buy a 2 3/4 inch capable shotgun like this Husqvarna that I got from him, shipped to my door for $404. That's taxes in, delivered to the door, and this thing is virtually like brand new. Unbelievable. 1949, and you close her, tight as a drum, zero play, and you got yourself a gun that's going to last another umpteen years. So, in closing, I guess I'm just going to repeat myself. Go and, view the gun, check the descriptions, make sure that if there's any cracks or whatnot before you shoot them, you address them, have a gunsmith or somebody that's knowledgeable, like myself, or a friend of yours maybe at the gun club that's really into old doubles, and they can look and give you an idea. Say, well, hey, there's a crack here, it's got to be fixed, or hey, you got some play in the receiver, we got to tighten it up a little bit before you get out in the range, and, give the bores a look through, look for pitting, bulges, dents, rot, rust, weak ribs. You can do the ring test. You take the barrels off, hang them on your fair, and you give them a little tap or with a screwdriver or something, and listen for that church bell chime. If you hear that nice church bell chime, that means the ribs are all solid and connected. If you get like a dead thud or a vibration, that's telling that the ribs might have some solder joints that are bad. Does it mean the gun is FUBAR? No. What it does mean is that it should take a trip to the gunsmith and have a better set of eyes, have its glims on it, you know what I mean? And give it a good going over. So, in closing, you respect this thing, it's going to respect you. And that's just all there is to it. You beat this thing up, it's not going to just beat up your shoulder, it's going to beat you up in the pocketbook, because it's going to cost you to fix it. So, pay homage to the old girls. They were made at a time when ammunition was made a certain way. Respect that. Use appropriate ammunition. Have fun. Be safe. And we will see you in the next video. I hope that addresses the questions of, pressure limits of ammo, time frames of when guns were made, transitioning periods. You got something that was made in the late 1800s, your black powder. Turn of the century, you're still playing with black powder and you're starting to get into smokeless. By about 1920, it was pretty much smokeless powders were on the mark. A lot of English guns were sent back and reproofed, re-nitro-proofed, Damascus guns. And sometimes you get a Damascus gun, it'll say nitro-proof underneath. And still, you have to bear in mind the pressure limits of the gun itself. Pay heed to the markings on the gun, obey them, and the gun will last you a good long time. Like I said, they don't make stuff like this anymore. This is a handcraft. This is a time gone. You'll never see this again. So, to make guns like this now, you could never afford them. The average Joe would never afford them. This gun would be into tens of thousands of dollars to buy now. It's just, the amount of time and workmanship, just making those Damascus barrels would be a very costly procedure nowadays. And, in today's market, almost unobtainable. So, take care of the old gun and they'll take care of you, plain and plump. And hopefully that answers some questions about appropriate loads and, the do's and don'ts, and have respect. And we'll see you in the next one.